Hello, everyone. So we left off with the Articles of Confederation and Shays' Rebellion exposing how weak they were. So let's get started. Now, there is an urgent meeting, a very urgent meeting to revise the Articles of Confederation. There had been many weaknesses with the Articles of Confederation. Congress was not able to tax, no court system was set up, no executive branch. It took 9 out of 13 states to agree to pass a law in Congress. If you wanted to amend something, it took the approval of all 13 states. There were just so many issues. And with Shays' Rebellion, it truly did expose exactly how weak the Articles of Confederation were. It was pretty clear that they were weak before that, but it definitely made it clear to everyone how weak they were. So anyway, there's an urgent meeting to revise these articles. So here you have two major figures, two of our founding fathers, who are urging the most for this meeting. You have James Madison, and then he's pictured on the left, and on the right is Alexander Hamilton. James Madison, later known as the father of our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We'll talk about why later. He was one of the most influential delegates at this constitutional convention. Later on, him and Thomas Jefferson are going to found the Democratic Republican Party, and it's called the first opposition political party, so kind of a big deal. He served as Secretary of State whenever Jefferson was president. He oversaw the Louisiana Purchase. A very important guy, to put it lightly. Also a future president. He's, the list goes on and on and on of accomplishments. And then with Alexander Hamilton, war hero during the Revolutionary War. He's going to be the Secretary of the Treasury whenever Washington is elected first president. We'll talk about him with the Federalist Papers here in just a little bit. He's going to help out with balancing the budget and getting us out of debt. The list goes on and on with him as well. So it is quite the group of delegates here. So they do urge George Washington to attend the Constitutional Convention because it does give legitimacy. He was the commander of the Continental Army. So whenever he agrees, it gives legitimacy because Washington was a larger than life, legitimately, he was very tall, and he was well accomplished. People respected George Washington. So Rhode Island was the only state to not send delegates to the convention. They were referred to as Rogue Island, and they were the last state to actually ratify the Constitution more than a year after it went into effect. So they felt that the Constitution gave too much power to the central government at the expense of the states, and they didn't feel that it explicitly protected religious freedom, but we'll get into that later. Anyways, so there were 55 delegates, and essentially they were the who's who of the states. So they're going to meet in Philadelphia in 1787. Now, it is extremely important to know that you have some big wigs here. You have, again, George Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin. He's there again. As one of their first acts, the delegates adopted rules, and those among the most important was secrecy. They wanted to be candid with each other and to be able to change their mind for the right reason, to be a part of uninterrupted discussion and conversation. And some people thought, why does this need to be secret? Some people misconstrued this as like suspicious. They thought that secret gatherings would be designed to not be as innocent, but it wasn't that way. Later on, there are actually notes that are going to be released that are James Madison's, and they wanted him to talk about what happened at the Constitutional Convention, and he was extremely secretive about it. He wouldn't even release his notes until after his death they were released. He took his secrecy oath very, very seriously. So here you will see that the government is going to be rewritten. And this is just a reference to the play Hamilton. You have on the left Alexander Hamilton saying, "I was chosen for the Constitutional Convention." It's from the play. And then Benjamin Franklin. I know, son. Anyway, I thought it was funny. Now, the biggest issue, the main reason they gathered was for representation in government, and as far as how much power the national government has compared to the states. So you have the big states versus the little states. So let's talk first of all about the Virginia plan. This was mainly James Madison and also George Washington's plan. This was their plan for government. It provided a proportional representation in a bicameral or a two-house legislature. It provided a strong national government with veto power over state laws, or to rejecting power over state laws. Now, this was also designed to protect the interests of large states in a strong natural republic. So you had those three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. You had the two houses in Congress, and then it was population-based representation. It wouldn't be just one vote for every state like it was with the Articles of Confederation. You also have the New Jersey plan, which was from a guy named William Paterson. He actually was a future justice of the Supreme Court. He was an eventual governor in New Jersey. He's a signer of the Constitution. So big deal. Big deal. Not one of the more well-known names, but still very important. So this is the New Jersey plan that's drafted. So he presented this plan to the government, or the plan of government to the convention. So this was essentially an alternate to the Virginia plan. It was designed to protect the security and power of the small states by limiting each state to one vote and giving most of the control of the national government to the larger states. But this plan wanted to retain a unicameral or one house legislature. So again, you have those equal votes for every state, and for that reason, it's known as a small state plan. And this position, it really reflected this belief that states were independent entities. And so they each entered the Union as states that were free and individually states, and so they needed to remain that way. Now, it is known now that if this plan was accepted, it would have doomed the plans for a strong national government, and it wouldn't have really done much to change the Articles of Confederation. So now you have the Great Compromise. They put together a major compromise because these discussions, they were heated, still respectful, but heated. So here you have, and this should be very, very familiar to you, you have 2 votes for every state in the Senate, but for the House of Representatives, the number of votes that you get in there is based on population. That's what POP is abbreviated. That's what that means. And then there is a census every 10 years. That is the population count. That's your representation. The issue of slavery does come up. This is what's going to come up a lot in these major meetings. So the South immediately, whenever representation was calculated by population, they wanted slaves to count for representation, even though they had absolutely no votes. So you have the 3/5 compromise. So what it said was that if you have all of the slaves total, 3/5 of those state slaves will be counted. Okay? So think about it this way. The South didn't want to give the slaves any representation, but they did want to count them for representation purposes to have more weight in government. And if their entire population counted, slave states would have more representation, and then that would have possibly led slavery to exist longer than it did. And people on the other side, they felt that they wanted to keep the Union together, So they came up with this compromise. And in the end, to tack on to the end, another thing was promise not to interfere with the slave trade for 20 years. Now, economic issues were solved. You had the federal government was able to tax, coin money, regulate trade. This solved a lot of the issues that were brought up at the time. Then you have issues with ratification. 9 states do have to agree, and then you have the Federalists. These are people who do want to adopt the new Constitution, and then it makes a whole lot of sense that anti-Federalists are not okay with adopting the new Constitution. You have what's called the Federalist Papers that are released. These were a collection of 85 articles and essays, and they were written by mostly Alexander Hamilton, but also you had quite a few that were written by James Madison and John Jay. And they were written under the pseudonym Publius, which means the people are of the people. And so they argued that the proposed system would preserve the Union and empower the federal government to act firmly and coherently in national interests. So the new Constitution was made at the Philadelphia Convention. And this was published in book form later on in 1788. And so even through the years, the Federalist Papers, they have been read and respected and studied for their analysis and interpretation of the Constitution. And so we're going to talk about the Bill of Rights in the next video, so I'm going to put a pin in that for now. So anyway, I hope you all have a good rest of your day.